Saddam Hussein and his regime are busy doing all they possibly can to ensure that inspectors succeed in finding absolutely nothing.
They didn't have any evidence.
Those who choose to live in denial may eventually be forced to live in fear.
The decision has been made, and we're going to invade.
It's September 2001, and a stunned United States is gearing up for war. President Bush calls together his key security officials. The defense minister arrives at the meeting with his right-hand man, a certain Paul Wolfowitz.
The deputies, myself and others, were not supposed to go. Wolfowitz did go, and he spoke up in front of the president saying, Iraq, we got to use this as an opportunity for Iraq.
And the president turned to the national security advisor and said, "Who is that?" And she told him who it was, the Deputy Secretary of Defense. And he said, "Well, tell him to shut up. I don't want to hear about it anymore. We're focused on Afghanistan."
A fortnight later, Congress finally removed the last hurdle blocking John Negroponte's nomination for the UN ambassadorship. In the meantime, Wolfowitz and his associates had already managed to make Iraq a key concern for the president. On his very first day on the job, Negroponte found that he'd been given an unexpected task to complete.
I was given instructions to seek out the ambassador of Iraq to the United Nations to read him the following talking points. And then they gave me some very severe points for the ambassador of Iraq, which basically said, if you even think about taking advantage of our current preoccupation with Afghanistan, you can be sure we will take very severe measures against you. It was a very threatening message. It's October 2001, and this administration is already thinking about Iraq, and frankly, I think they're looking for ways to blame Iraq for what has happened.
This warning shot from the US was leaked in the press, but went largely unnoticed. The world had its eyes firmly fixed on Afghanistan, where the Taliban had been pushed from power by the Americans and their local allies. Behind the scenes, the Bush White House was setting some serious wheels in motion. 2002 had barely begun when Sam Faddis was told to put together a special team at the CIA.
The decision has already been made by the President of the United States, Bush, that we will invade. So, and I mean that exactly the way I say that. That's not we might invade, or if there are weapons of mass destruction, we'll invade. No, the decision has been made, we're going to invade. So my job was to take in the first team to prepare for the invasion of Iraq.
Faddis and his team were the first Americans to land in Iraq in the summer of 2002. In the beginning, they were just 8, but as the months rolled by, their numbers grew. Soon, around 50 agents were based in Kurdistan, and they were trawling the country in search of weapons of mass destruction.
By the middle of 2002, there was no question to me that there was planning for an invasion. However, Powell and I continued to try to avoid the war and went back for that final UN resolution.
France, Germany and Russia were all against taking part in a war without a valid reason. A resolution agreed with the US meant that some time had now been bought. The text also stipulated that UN inspectors should visit Iraq to check whether Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction or not, much to the frustration of the US Vice President, Dick Cheney.
He told us a few things, and among the things that startled me a little was that we will not hesitate to discredit you in favor of disarmament. It was a little cryptical, but the meaning was, we realized later, was that if you do not find up and dig up weapons, then we will undertake the disarmament of Iraq ourselves.
Hans Blix and his team crisscrossed Iraq, leaving no stone unturned, entering even the grandest of palaces. But they found no weapons of mass destruction.
Chemicals, weapons, are not my marmalade. you keep track of it. And so you must have records of that. But then when we came to Saddam's palace on one of the couple of inspections there, and we went in all over the place, and the inspectors opened the refrigerators, they found only marmalade, no chemical weapons, only marmalade.
It was all too much for the French. The US tried to legitimize a highly likely declaration of war through a new UN resolution. But Paris threatened to use its power of veto, and a dividing line was drawn. A few weeks later, Dominique de Villepin made an impassioned speech.
C'est un vieux pays. La France d'un vieux continent comme le mien, l'Europe, et qui sait tout ce qu'il doit aux combattants de la liberté venus d'Amérique. Fidèle à ses valeurs, il veut agir résolument avec tous les membres de la communauté internationale. Il croit en notre capacité à construire ensemble un monde meilleur.
Alors vous le savez, on n'applaudit jamais au Conseil de sécurité, il a été applaudi spontanément, on a senti que quelque chose se passait. C'est vrai que ce jour-là, la France a été la voix d'une grande partie du monde. Et ce n'est pas négligeable.
Ce discours magnifique a été perçu à Washington comme une claque. Et Colin Powell m'a convoqué dans son bureau en disant « Sergent David, j'ai essayé de vous aider pour plaider la cause de la raison face aux autres, c'est-à-dire le vice-président Dick Cheney, c'est-à-dire le ministre de la Défense Don Rumsfeld. Mais maintenant, je suis carbonisé. I'm carbonized.
I was not mad at Dominique de Villepin at all. He never told us something that was not true. For me, there was no surprise in Dominique de Villepin, and I give him credit. He had the courage to tell us.
At the heart of the Bush administration, two rival camps had formed. On one side, those in favour of war, led by Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld. On the other, those flying the flag for diplomacy, like Colin Powell and his team. Lawrence Wilkerson got a visit from a frustrated colonel from the Pentagon.
He said, well, they think you're spies. Spies? Spies for whom? They just don't like, your boss. Secretary Powell. Oh, okay, so you're telling me that we can't talk anymore? We want to talk, the colonel said to me. We want to talk. We need to talk. But Secretary of Defense tells us we can't. So I realized that part of it, if not a large part of it, was they were talking about Syria, and they were talking about Iraq, and they were talking about Iran, and they were war planning for those countries. And they didn't want us to find out about it.
At the end of January 2003, Colin Powell left the White House to join his deputy on the 7th floor of the State Department. George Bush had just told him that he was going to have to give a speech at the UN Security Council to present the evidence found by the US. The Vice President's office had handed him a whole dossier of papers.
He said, frankly, pardon me, but it looks like crap. He said, so I'm going to go out to the CIA and spend the next several days out there going through each piece of intelligence to make sure that it stands up.
Along with his trusted chief of staff, Powell spent the week at Langley. The CIA's director, George Tenet, had promised to assign some of his agents to help.
When I got out there, I had no intelligence expert, professional intelligence expert, to tell George Tenet to go screw himself. You're wrong, George. Sorry, let me tell you why you're wrong. So I failed there. Then I went out to the CIA and lived there for about 6 days and 6 nights. My team consisted of a speechwriter, Lynn Davidson, Barry Lowenkron, a former member of the National Intelligence Council, and George, the first day, refused to give me any access to the CIA's computers. So I called Barry over and I said, Barry, you still got your card? You still read in? He said, I don't know, let's see. He sat down at the terminal, checked in, bingo, he was still in. So I told, middle finger to Tenet, and we were on the computer.
Throughout that week, each scrap of evidence was pulled apart and analysed. Many findings were simply dismissed by the Secretary of State's team. On the eve of the Security Council speech, Powell, Tenet and their teams met again, but this time in New York on the top floor of the offices of America's UN ambassador. The Secretary of State was busy rehearsing his text for the first time and to the whole room.
He stopped speaking and the room was deathly quiet. And I'm sitting to his left and Tenet's sitting to his right. And he turned his head towards Tenet and he said, "George, you guarantee me that everything in this presentation is the best you can do?" And Tenet looked at him and said, "Yes, I do." And then Powell said, "Good, because you are going to be behind me tomorrow, in camera."
Saddam Hussein and his regime are busy doing all they possibly can to ensure that inspectors succeed in finding absolutely nothing.
Je me penche vers Dominique de Villepin et je lui dis, ici dans cette salle, personne ne croit ce qu'il dit, hein, je veux dire, bon, et peut-être pas lui-même.
I sat across him from the table, and I remember very well that I felt increasingly skeptical about it, because it didn't square at all with our experience.
We have diagrammed what our sources reported about these mobile facilities. Here you see both truck and rail car mounted mobile factories. We know what the fermenters look like. We know what the tanks, pumps, compressors, and other parts look like.
How do you know these things? Who told you these things? And why can't we find any of the same stuff? We're here all day, every day, month after month after month, running, by the time we were done, hundreds of sources. But we can't find it.
But one thing I can assure you is he had no intent to deceive anybody. There was no intention to deceive. He was simply acting on mistaken and incorrect information.
He says it's a blot on his record which will never go away. He's not Edith Piaf. Je ne regrette rien. He regrets.
About this amount.
The Bush administration wanted to go further than Colin Powell's speech. The White House did all it could to convince those around them at every opportunity.
Je me souviens d'une réunion des ministres de l'OTAN avec Rumsfeld. Il est arrivé avec des photographies en nous disant « Voilà, j'ai la preuve que les Irakiens se préparent à lancer des missiles qui sont potentiellement des missiles nucléaires. » Il se trouve que juste avant que je parte, nos services de renseignement m'avaient donné des photos prises par nos satellites français de ce même endroit, sous un angle un peu différent. Et à ce moment-là, j'ai sorti des photos et j'ai dit « Monsieur le secrétaire d'État, regardez, ce sont des silos à blé. » Il y a eu un silence, autant vous dire, dans cette réunion. Il était foudrage, ça se sentait, ça se voyait. Et là-dessus, il a sorti des éprouvettes en disant « Voyez que là-dedans, il y a des virus de je ne sais pas quoi que nous avons récupérés en Irak », ce qui était évidemment aussi faux. J'avais demandé à mon voisin, c'était un Italien, je crois, qui était à côté de moi, je lui ai dit « Qu'est-ce que je fais ? Je laisse tomber pour qu'on voit ?»
The CIA based its claims on the testimony of one source at the German Secret Service, a source codenamed Curveball, who they'd never managed to interview. The Germans were keen to question those accusations.
Even in February 2003, I could not have stood up and said there are no weapons. I could say 700 inspections, so we haven't found anything, and these are professional.
One question remained unanswered, though. If Saddam Hussein had got rid of these weapons of mass destruction, why had he not come forward with any proof?
He was afraid of Iran. He thought Iran would take advantage of him. That's what it was.
Whether the facts saw the light of day or not, toppling Saddam Hussein was now an obsession in Washington.
At this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger.
La guerre a commencé la nuit dernière, mais c'est de toute évidence une nouvelle phase qui a débuté.
Les missiles américains ont frappé 3 quartiers, notamment le quartier présidentiel de Saddam Hussein.
Un raid au cœur même de Bagdad. Aujourd'hui, la ville a donc vraiment basculé dans la guerre.
Je suis à Washington le jour de la chute de Bagdad. Je me rappelle, je suis à la Maison-Blanche, le directeur d'Europe me dit « Vous savez, ça prendra longtemps avant que les États-Unis pardonnent à la France. » Et moi je réponds « Vous savez, ça prendra longtemps avant que le monde pardonne aux États-Unis. » Et là, je me lève et je sors.